What is going on, you guys? It's Coaster Jedi back at you with another video here. This time I'll be recapping my trip to King's Dominion the 10th of August 2021. So by this point I've probably already released my Carowinds video of this type, but if you haven't seen that yet, this is where I recap my experiences at the park. I'll just tell you basically how the day went, how many coasters I rode, what was I able to do, how crowded was that day, and so on and so forth. So let's get started with this video. So King's Dominion is not too far from my house. It's only about a couple hours. So it's basically my home Cedar Fair park, which is great. It's a good park and it's very fun. But I hadn't been there since 2016, and so the park had changed a little bit since then, and I hadn't ridden Intimidator 305 before, so I was excited to get started with the day. So our first rides of the day, we got there right about as it opened, maybe a couple minutes after, and we went straight to Twisted Timbers, which is, of course, one of the more popular rides in the park. I was pretty hyped for this, and it did not disappoint. It met my expectations pretty much exactly. Had some great airtime. It was very smooth, very enjoyable. We got two rides back to back to start off the day, which was a great start to the day. So I sat in back row and second to back row on the two rides. So that was great. I would have liked to experience it in the front, but I saw that the back was open and it looked like it would be amazing, and I'm usually a back row rider too, and this did not disappoint. It was a great start to the day. Next up, we decided to do a couple of smaller coasters on our way over to Intimidator 305. So we hit Apple's Apple, which I had ridden before, but it was fun to re-experience. It's definitely a solid little wild mouse. And we also experienced Racer 75. So we did one side of it. I thought it was decent. It was better than I remembered. It doesn't have the best airtime, but it's pretty smooth. It doesn't have too many rough moments. And I remembered it being pretty bad before, but it was actually a pretty solid ride. And I really enjoyed the racing aspect. That was definitely my favorite part of this ride. So it was good to re-experience these couple, but they weren't really anything crazy. But what was crazy was Intimidator 305. This is the first time I got to experience this Giga Coaster, and it was actually the third Giga Coaster that I've ridden so far. And this one was fantastic. From its crazy, insane drop to its intensity, whippy transitions, and even some airtime moments mixed in. My first time riding it, I wasn't overly impressed. I thought it was a good, solid ride, but really not too high on the list. Maybe a top 20 ride. But I would come back to it later just to see if this opinion would hold up. The next stop was Flight of Fear, and at this point we hadn't really waited more than 5 minutes for anything. We did have to wait about 15 to 20 minutes to get on Flight of Fear. It did have a pretty decent line, but we didn't mind too much because it was a really, really hot day. It was great to get in the air conditioning. But Flight of Fear was a pretty fun ride, pretty solid, and because I had already ridden Joker's Jinx, I sort of knew what to expect, but it was enjoyable, and I enjoyed the break from the heat as well. Probably one of the things that surprised me the most about this ride was how the riders exit before it comes back into the main entrance of the station, which is pretty cool. So it looks like the people disappeared. So I think that's a really fun and interesting way to play up the fear factor. So this was a fun, enjoyable ride, and it made my top 50. So next we decided to re-hit Anaconda. Anaconda was actually my 23rd credit I ever got, and it helped me get over my fear of some roller coasters. I really enjoyed this thing. It's still not incredible, but it's a fun ride. It has a couple of rough moments, and the turns in the middle really are a little pointless, but it's a pretty fun overall ride, and it has some good forces in the inversions. Then we went to Chick-fil-A for lunch, and I wouldn't recommend that because usually it has a pretty long line, and in addition to that, it's not the cheapest. But we needed some food, and that helped us get some sustenance for the rest of the day. And next up after that was Dominator. That was another coaster that I rode a few years ago, but didn't really remember it very well. But it was my first B&M, and it really helped me get over my fear of large roller coasters. But it was better than I remembered, from its very forceful first drop in the back row to its pretty good collection of inversions, including a very hang time filled vertical loop. Very enjoyable ride, and nobody was in line for it, so we got back-to-back rides in the back row, so that was very good. And it was pretty smooth back there too, so that was great. Next it was time for a couple of re-rides. Next we hit Backlot Stunt Coaster, which I had actually just ridden a couple of years ago at Canada's Wonderland. And so it's great to re-experience it. I always think these are fun clones that are enjoyable, have some good theming, and have some decent forces to them. But really what was important was getting re-rides on Intimidator 305. So me and one of my friends decided to go back for some more, and that was fantastic. We rode in the back row back-to-back times, and oh my gosh, it was such a great ride in the back row, and that really catapulted it up on my list of coasters. So now it ranks much higher than it did before. The airtime just seemed better, the drop was incredible, the forces were there, and it was just very strong of a ride. So I was very pleased with how Intimidator 305 turned out. As I mentioned before, it was very hot that day and the sun was beating down on us pretty hard. So we decided to take a little break from riding coasters, especially after a few rides on Intimidator 305. So we went to the water park and cooled down there for about an hour. This felt really nice. Spent some time in the lazy river and the wave pool, and even though it took away from me riding coasters, it was a much needed break and it was actually quite enjoyable. So we had some fun there, and it was great to not be scorching hot the entire day. Unfortunately, after we went in the water park, we didn't have much more time for riding because inclement weather was on the way, as it seemed to be the theme with every time I've gone to an amusement park this year. But thankfully we got a ride on Grizzly next, which was insanely rough in the back row. It was so rough that I actually undid my friend's seatbelt who was riding with me. So that was interesting, and yeah, it bashed you around pretty good. And then we ended our coaster riding day with one more ride on Anaconda, which was one of the last rides to actually be open during the inclement weather. So I found that ironic because it's actually somewhat of a tall coaster, but I wasn't going to complain because it was nice to still have an open ride. So that was fun to get back on there, and then we hit the bumper cars before we left because that was the last thing that was open, and got out of there around 6:15 or so. So that was earlier than we were expecting to leave so that we could go back and eat somewhere good on the way. Now for the final ride count. 3 on Intimidator 305, 2 on Twisted Timbers, 2 on Dominator, 2 on Anaconda, 1 on Flight of Fear, 1 on Backlot Sun Coaster, 1 on Racer 75, 1 on Grizzly, and 1 on Apple's Apple. We skipped Woodstock Express and Great Pumpkin Coaster, and we also were not able to ride Avalanche because it was down. As for non-coasters, we spent time in the Lazy River and Wave Pool, and went once on the bumper cars as we were leaving. So overall, it was a pretty fun day of coaster riding. I wish I could have gotten a couple more rides in on Twisted Timbers and I-305, but since the park's not too far from my house, I'll definitely be visiting there next year. So I was very pleased with how Intimidator 305 and Twisted Timbers were. They were very strong rides, and so we'll have to see where they land in my top 25 once I put out that video. So expect to be seeing that before too long if it's not already out. So for some final thoughts on the park. This park has an elite 1-2 punch in I-305 and Twisted Timbers. Dominator is a very strong number 3, and I feel like it's underrated and gets more hate than it deserves. Same thing with Anaconda and Flight of Fear, which are good top 5 coasters as well. So that it has a pretty good top 5. I know a lot of people wouldn't say that that's their top 5, but that's what I think it is personally. Then you have some decent supporting coasters, like Racer 75, Backlot Sun Coaster, Grizzly, a couple of others. This park really will benefit from the 40 free spin coming next year, so that will be a nice addition, but I don't think it'll be anything crazy. But it's always good to have a new coaster here. As for surprises, probably what surprised me most was how good Intimidator 305 was, how much fun it was, because usually I'm somebody who focuses more on, less on intensity and more on airtime, speed, and gracefulness, but I really did enjoy Intimidator 305. So that was a great ride. For bad surprises, really, there weren't a lot of them. Really, everything bad came from the weather between the heat and the rain and storm later on. So that was just an unfortunate 1-2 punch there. But overall, it was a pretty good day at King's Dominion, and I really enjoyed coming back here for the first time in 5 years. And hopefully I'll be able to go back next year and really just focus on riding Intimidator 305 and Twisted Timbers a lot. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And be sure to comment your experiences at King's Dominion. And if you have any questions about the park, let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions and give any tips you need. You guys are awesome. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.